There we go. Cool. Okay. So, um, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. All right. So you have written a book about postpartum psychosis and your experience with that.
Thank you so much for inviting me on to speak with you, Dr. Sorensen.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on with me to talk with me. I'm so happy about this. And your book is just so wonderful. Like I was so excited to read it.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful to have like a reproductive psychiatrist read it. That meant a lot to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really goes into a lot of different things that I think are so important about postpartum psychosis and just like postpartum. I mean, postpartum's rough even without psychosis.
Yes.
So, I mean, so many women feel like they are having trouble, all sorts of trouble. But one of the things I really loved in your book is that as we're like moving away from thinking about psychosis as a dopamine problem, we're thinking about it more as a concentration problem. And it seemed like you were really frustrated by your concentration. Can you tell me
Yeah,
more about that?
yeah, and I didn't even realize that there was movement away from like the dopamine kind of hypothesis thing, because I remember my psychiatrist telling me that, well, like, after I got better, that she thought like that this was the kind of way that psychiatry was looking at it. So that's really interesting to hear. And yes, concentration was a really big issue for me, especially in my second bout of postpartum psychosis. I mean, I had it twice, but my second one was more severe. And, concentration was a really big issue because I felt like I wasn't able to concentrate on anything aside from the repeating thoughts and the voices I was hearing in my head. Like I felt like it was something that was like taking up all of my attention and focus, and it was consuming it at all times. Like even when I was actively like trying to concentrate on something else or focus on something else, it was like my mind had a life of its own in terms of what it wanted to give attention to, and it was always giving attention to the thoughts and the voices that I was hearing. Like I remember like it got so bad that I wasn't really able to give focus or attention to even like the activities of daily living, like including like brushing my teeth, bathing, or even remembering to eat. And like I remember like in those first 2 weeks when I was initially experiencing those symptoms, I lost like 10 to 15 pounds. So it was
Oh,
like
wow.
some kind of like crazy diet plan that I didn't even intend to be on. And it was because like I didn't even think to eat, or I wasn't even able to shore up the concentration that was necessary to eat. Like I think we take it for granted that that everything takes attention and focus, including the ability to eat or maybe even like sleep. And so I can kind of really understand how it might be veering off into this area of looking at it as an attention problem, because I really had no attention for anything except what my mind kind of said, this is all you're going to be focusing on for the rest of, like, the day, the week, the month, or whatever. So
Yeah.
I look forward to reading up into that myself.
Well, and then did your voices actually bother you, or were you invested in them and feeling like they were part of you?
So initially, not being able to concentrate was definitely more upsetting than the mundane thoughts and voices I was hearing, because they were kind of like drab stuff that it was talking about, like, oh, why don't you clean this, or things like that. So that wasn't very interesting. So it was the fact that I couldn't concentrate on anything that I wanted to, that was definitely what was the most disturbing element. But later, when I started to hear like command hallucinations, and the voices started becoming aggressive, I didn't care anymore about the fact that I couldn't concentrate. That was the command hallucinations was more disturbing. But initially, for sure, it was just the fact that I couldn't concentrate on anything that I wanted to. That was the disturbing element.
Okay. Did you ever get to the point where your voices kind of narrated what you were doing too?
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, I do remember. There's this part in my book when I talked about because I was scared of going to the washroom. I kind of like peed on myself, and I remember at
Oh
one point
gosh.
the voice. the voices were like, see, you are crazy. Like it was like narrating what was happening and like pointing out, like, in case you think you're not crazy, you are. Look at what you just did, type of thing. So do you mean like narrating in that sense?
Yeah, it's supposed to be like a first rank, like a indicative of a really severe psychotic symptom, actually, if they start narrating for you.
Yeah. So when it was pointing out, like, that I did pee on myself, I guess, yeah, I think that it was narrating for me what was happening.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it.
Yeah.
Um, for sure. And then I'm going to go back and review my questions, but um oh yeah, if somebody had like offered, so actually how I get a lot of people to take medicine for psychosis is not by saying it's going to make the voices go away or delusions go away. Usually I tell them that actually what's going to do is it's going to help them focus on what they want to do and concentrate on the things they want to do.
Hmm.
Um, and I've had a lot more success in terms of like getting people to actually take medicine because I think a lot of people are kind of invested, especially if it's a chronic psychosis, like invested in their delusions and hearing things. But I was just kind of wondering from your perspective, like what would have been a good sell for you to actually take an antipsychotic during this time?
Yeah, definitely, if earlier on when I was going in with the thoughts and the voices in my head, that was definitely what I wanted to get back, the ability to concentrate on what. So if you said, this will help you to concentrate on what you want, I would have been like, give it to me, I'm ready. Like, you know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
just what I want. And even later, I think that telling me that would have helped, because later on when I really kind of believed that there was this kind of like it was a devil or God communicating with me, like I didn't have a sense at all like it was like a medical problem. The thing that I perceived more as a medical problem was the inability to kind of do what I wanted to do, type of thing. So I think that is probably, whether the person has insight or not, doesn't have insight, that is the best way to approach getting medication into the person, to talk about that loss of concentration, the ability to kind of focus. So I think that is a smart approach.
Yeah, I've used it a few times. But yeah, and it just seems it seems like that is the part of this of psychosis that bothers people the most, and they're coming out with all these new medications that are supposed to work on acetylcholine and concentration. So some of the medicines like donepezil for Alzheimer's, they're thinking about using and like treating long-term psychosis like conditions like schizophrenia. And so
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
um
and I think that would really help, because a lot of times I think that people don't have even insight into the fact that the voices that they're hearing is kind of like a medical issue, right?
mhm.
So like I remember, like I had this distinction in my book that I talk about, like there were some symptoms I was okay sharing with my psychiatrist, and the other ones I was like, oh no, this is real. Like I really am having conversations with God or whatever. So to approach the one that seems more medical to them, like even though I was bothered by the voices, but I didn't perceive that as a medical issue. So yeah, so it's kind of like, I think that is the more kind of sneaky and smart way of getting what the person needs into them,
Yes, but it also it makes sense with science too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for sure. Of course, of course. Everything when you're dealing with psychiatry has to make sense with science. But
yeah. So
sometimes
I
it's
got
good to
to
have a way that doesn't kind of offend the person. Like I remember in my book there, when my doctor pointed out that I needed antipsychotics, like it made me cry, because I felt like, she was saying I was, crazy or whatever. But so
yeah.
sometimes you also want to like placate their need um to hold themselves up and not feel like, something like, if they have that internal stigma of like, oh no, hopefully we'll get to a place where people won't have that stigma toward mental health issues. But
But
so
also, they're really poorly named, like if you think about it, because we use antipsychotics, and this is actually a rant that I have on a regular basis. Sorry. But like So we use antipsychotics to help people with depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia, and it's usually dose dependent. So, like
Mhm.
really low doses, we'll use it to treat depression, and medium, it's more bipolar disorder, and really high doses, it's schizophrenia. So,
Mhm.
like, why are we going around and calling these medicines antipsychotics when they treat so much more than just psychosis?
Yes. And here's a rant that I'm, you probably read it in my book. I
Yeah.
cannot for the life of me understand why a psychopath and psychotic sound so close together. And in my book, I talk about how my brother kind of said, "Oh, I heard you're like a psychopath," and I was like, "No, I'm
Oh
not.
gosh.
I'm psycho. I have psychosis." Why are those words so similar? I
I
wish we
don't
could
know.
put it.
So, so the original name for psychosis, I think, was dementia praecox.
Oh, okay.
Um,
That doesn't sound that
so
much better either.
I know, and again, it points to that like concentration issue because like people that have, and it was specifically for schizophrenia, which is
Mhm,
very different from what you had, and
mhm.
it has a lot of like very like a lot of they're all like withdrawal symptoms. So like not being able to enjoy things or like have
Oh, okay.
motivation or engage in things or not even be able to find speech.
Mhm.
So, but anyhow, that's the original name, I believe, that Kraepelin, whatever. It's some German guy. Um
Mhm.
that he gave to schizophrenia. And then it was interesting because even autism used to be named childhood schizophrenia, I think.
Oh,
Yeah. So, I mean, psychiatry has gone through so many, psychiatry has a long way to go, that's for sure. In terms of like reducing stigma and helping people. But I think that I don't have a good explanation for why sociopathy and psychopathy are so
so
close to psychosis, but they're very different. They're
I
extremely
know
different.
for sure.
Yeah.
Even in my psychotic frame of mind, I knew the difference, but it really bothered me when, like, other people did it, and I was like, "Oh no."
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
you know what? I think that you brought up Ted Bundy in the
Mhm.
book and about how like was that the point when your brother-in-law called you said you had the psych that you were a psychopath?
Yeah, he said, "I can't believe you're a psychopath," and I was like, "No, I'm not a psychopath. That's like Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
I have psychosis."
So I have some questions about Ted Bundy, actually. So did you get to watch that Netflix documentary on him?
Oh no, no, I didn't.
No? Oh, okay. So so I mean, Ted Bundy did some crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
But like he he was allowed to serve as his own lawyer in court. And
Mhm,
that man clearly could not advocate for himself at
mhm,
all. Like he was
mhm.
just like asking really inappropriate questions
Oh.
and making himself look terrible.
Mhm,
And like if a forensic psychiatrist were to be asked to evaluate him today and say like is he competent to stand trial?
mhm.
We would have said no, he's not
Yeah,
competent because he can't advocate for himself. And so I kind of wonder if we used poor Ted Bundy and all of the horrible things that he did as almost like a clown,
mm,
honestly, because we let him do this entertaining thing where he, basically drove himself into the ground. But that doesn't seem legal. I mean, anyhow,
yeah.
that's just a rant from
Now you're making me kind of want to watch it, but I was like,
yeah.
oh, I think the things that I've read about him, I was like, I might have nightmares.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
mean like he's a scary dude, but he's a terrifying guy and just did all this insane stuff. But he definitely could not advocate for himself at
yeah,
all in
yeah.
trial. And
But did he fire his lawyers? Is that why how he ended up
yeah, he
representing?
fired his so he and like I wonder if he was manic or something, and
Yeah,
psychotic at the time because he fired his lawyers. He had done like some law school, so he had enough language to sound legit. Um,
yeah.
but he would ask like the victims or people to like describe in like vivid detail like what they
Oh,
had been through or what they had seen or found. And it was like, oh my gosh, of course, like this is going to make this guy look terrible. And I mean, he make, but like the whole point of the court and the question of the court and whether or not he's competent to stand court, like in court, is can he advocate for himself?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And he
like,
clearly couldn't. Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I just like obviously he did some really scary stuff, and I actually went to FSU. So we
Is
had this
that where he went from?
trail actually here in Tallahassee that we call it the Bundy Trail, and
Oh,
I know, yeah, so,
I'm sure many people don't like to take that trail.
all the time, but you just always, I don't, yeah, you just it's Florida, we got weird stuff all the time, so
Oh, okay.
yeah. So sorry about the Ted Bundy question.
All right.
But I think it brings up, and so one other thing about mania that like really gets me going sometimes is that um people when they're manic they can be so grandiose and full of themselves, and so like it's hard to decide if somebody is a sociopath or a psychopath, which
Mm.
are kind of interchangeable, not 100%, but pretty much interchangeable. Um, when they're in that state. And so for poor old Ted Bundy, I wonder like
What was
I,
going on with him?
yeah, I think he probably had both, you know.
Yeah.
So that's my hypothesis. But
Yeah.
man, okay. So so you went to the doctor 6 times before getting diagnosed and treated with,
Yeah.
was it, how many times did it take for you to get diagnosed with like a postpartum syndrome?
No, I was never diagnosed with a postpartum syndrome.
What? What do you mean?
No, none of those times. I was just told like, oh, it's like your grief over your miscarriage, grief. Then I was told once, oh, you're having a panic attack.
Oh
Um,
no.
nope. I myself said, I think I'm having postpartum depression. I diagnosed myself.
Yeah, I love in the book how you're like doing the research and like,
Yeah.
you know, and like, did you come up with psychotic features on your own? Like,
No, no, no. I didn't.
okay.
I didn't.
Because
I think that if I came across it, then I would probably would have suggested it to them.
yeah, because I
I
mean,
just came up with the postpartum depression because
and this was like 2001 or so.
no, this was 2006.
2006. Okay, so the internet was, we all knew how to use the internet at this time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that nobody ever diagnosed me with postpartum depression or anything. I just kind of like
Oh my gosh.
went in and said, I think I'm having postpartum depression. And the only postpartum related diagnosis I got was from the perinatal psychiatrist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that that eventually happened, but that took 6 tries,
Yes. Yes.
which is so wild because I mean, like, why did it take all these doctors all this time to figure out something was going on with you after a miscarriage? I mean,
Yeah.
and
I have my own many hypotheses that I postulate in the book, but I mean,
yeah.
I don't, I can't, I have a feeling it has to do, like one of the reasons that I started my Instagram account is because I think part of it is just ignorance because, you know, um, legitimately think a lot of them didn't know anything about postpartum psychosis. And I remember actually after like about I remember like about 2 years after I had recovered, I went to my GP and I happened to see her computer screen. And on the computer screen, it says patient has bipolar. And I said to her, hey, how come it says patient has bipolar? And she said, because you have bipolar. And I said, no, I don't. And she said,
Uh-huh.
you don't? And I said, no. I said, she said, you had postpartum psychosis. And I said, yeah. But I said, didn't you ever get any of the follow-up reports from my psychiatrist? And she was like, no, what do you mean? And then I told her, well, she's actually diagnosed me with postpartum depression that had developed psychotic features. And I was taking antidepressants for a long time, and I don't think you would really give that to somebody with bipolar. And then she was like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, you're completely right. So I just think that there's just like so much ignorance about all of this kind of stuff. And when I went back to my psychiatrist, like this was after I had stopped seeing her, I went back and I said, can you just make sure my GP has my reports? And she was just like, I don't like really know what goes on with GPs, but apparently they don't get enough education about any of this stuff.
Well, and I do have to say that like in psychiatry school, in psychiatry residency, like really like they taught us kind of like nailed it down. Like if you see postpartum psychosis, like think bipolar disorder because
Yep.
that's one that's most likely. But and I think that I think before meeting you, honestly, that I really thought that like postpartum psychosis really was more equivalent to a bipolar disorder. So thank you so much for helping me with that.
Okay. Oh
And
wow. Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah,
know it's always supposed to be viewed as bipolar unless like it should always be approached as bipolar because from you can correct me if I'm wrong because if you give antidepressants to somebody that's manic it could spike their mania, right? But correct? Yeah. And
yes.
so but from what my psychiatrist informed me after was that she said yeah, in most cases it is bipolar and that's why she watched me for like a year after just to make sure. But she said it can happen when major depression develops psychotic features. It can happen totally because just randomly because of like severe sleep deprivation. And she said it can happen in people that have schizophrenia. So she said it's not like a one size fits all. You need to kind of figure it out for the person. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's such a good point. Like it's not one size fits all. And like we kind of had this, I think that I was really taught that I was kind of, just go in and think this. I do think that there is one other important point to postpartum psychosis with the bipolar disorder. And I think it's because um the first line treatment for bipolar disorder is lithium.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very fascinating because that's the first line treatment for postpartum psychosis. And so like lithium really isn't an antipsychotic. It I mean, it'll slow down mania with psychotic features and everything, but you don't normally think about like lithium to just go ahead and treat psychosis. But for postpartum psychosis, lithium is kind of the first go-to. You still use antipsychotics, but
Mm-hmm.
and I even am working with somebody right now who is on lithium, and it's so fascinating because like she's on a antipsychotic medicine and still very paranoid. And then when I get her to finally take the lithium, the
Mm-hmm.
paranoia resolves, and I'm like, holy
Oh,
cow, that
even
wow,
better. Wow.
um and so it's kind of this back and forth of the antipsychotic should be resolving the paranoia, but for some reason it's not.
Yeah.
And
So
so I wonder if that's something that has come up in like other cases. But
yeah, but have you also heard like one thing that like I've noticed and I think I pointed it out in my book is that in a lot of the infanticide cases, the people I don't know, I'm thinking that they seem more to be like maybe like similar to mine, postpartum depression with psychotic features because you don't really hear of any of the family coming forward reporting any manic type of symptoms. It's more like the very like depressive type. And so it always makes me wonder like, are we that subtype that's always kind of ignored because practitioners are always told to look for the manic type of symptoms, you know?
well, really, like, and when you see it, it doesn't really look manic. I think that's like the thing that is, I, that's the weirdest thing is like, it doesn't really look like mania. So like, really, it'll present as like the postpartum psycho, and this is just in my experience, but it'll present as the postpartum psychosis and like maybe have some elements of mania, but not really be a manic episode. So what you want to do is like watch longitudinally if the
Yeah.
person goes on to have a manic episode.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, because it can be it's like it looks like how it presented in you.
Hmm.
Uh and then like it's kind of like, oh, which one, what it's behind the motor here, what's driving the car here. um
Ah, okay. I can understand because
yeah.
I guess that's why my psychiatrist watched me for like a year and was like, I want to make sure that, it's not, and then after she watched me for like a year and a half, she was like, no, I'm confident that it wasn't anything.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So like even if it's just like that first postpartum psychosis and then like usually the person might like go on to develop a bipolar disorder or anyway, that's yeah. I love your
Poor thing.
psychiatrist, by the way.
Oh, well, you remind me kind of her, the
Oh,
way that you approach things. So, I feel like you're right there up in the same leagues as her. She's a really amazing woman, and if you ever like I've checked her, back and read her reviews, and everybody else that's been to her always says a similar type of stuff that I think about her. So it
oh,
was interesting.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you expressed a lot of concerns about like being Muslim and then seeing a doctor that wasn't Muslim. How do you think how is Dr. Baker, is that her real name?
No, no.
Okay. Well, how was your psychiatrist able to kind of like bridge the gap in order to have you trust her?
Yeah, you know what? Like that was something that only became a problem when I was psychotic. I actually hate seeing doctors of my own faith. I always like that's why my dad was like so confused. He was like, "Why do you want to go?" Because I was always like, "I don't want to go to a doctor that I'll later see in my,
Oh
community."
yeah.
So I avoid that. So it was like bizarre for my family when I was suddenly like, and the only reason I felt like that was because I truly believed I was having like a spiritual experience that I wanted to explain to a Muslim doctor. Um, and so like obviously I hid that part from Dr. Baker until I got better. Then I kind of vomited it all out and she was like, whoa. So I think just the fact that she was such a empathetic, caring, listening person is what kept drawing me back to her. Like I felt in a safe space with her. And even though I couldn't tell her this delusional secret I had, everything else about her just made me feel so comfortable that, and that's essentially what my inner self was looking for. Somebody that would listen to me and hear me out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's all anybody wants, whether they're psychotic or not,
Yeah.
honestly. Just to feel understood and appreciated for who you
Yeah.
are. But I'm so glad that you were able to find her. And
Yeah.
I just can't believe it took so long. And you're a woman of color, and so I wonder if that really impacted the delays in your care.
Yeah. I can just see that there's 1 minute left. Do we need to start?
Oh yeah. Do you want me to just like restart the meeting?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Let me see.